In today's video, we're going to be making a Weck jar, so print your pattern, get your scissors, and let's get started.
This is what your pattern should look like after you've printed it out.
Before you cut your paper, I would recommend that you measure out the boxes in the top right and top left corners. This should be a 1 by 1 inch square. If for some reason yours are not a 1 by 1 inch square, then I recommend stopping, looking at your printer settings, and you're also welcome to reach out to me if you can't figure it out.
But if both of your squares are measuring correctly, then you can start cutting your pattern out.
Notice that the pattern has two A's with triangles around them. Align the 2 points of the triangles together, and then you can tape the two pieces together. For this project, you're going to need an outer fabric, an inner fabric, and some batting. Please start out by ironing your outer and your inner fabric. When that's completed, then you can take your pattern piece and place it directly over your outer fabric. Now cut your fabric according to the paper pattern piece, however you'd like to do that. And you'll cut out both pieces of your fabric, your inner and your outer lining, according to this pattern piece. And now we'll move on to quilting our fabric. I've noticed some people want some direction in doing this, so let me show you what I do. It's just showing you a Hera marker. So I will take my ruler and set it up diagonally as you see, and just run my Hera marker down the side of it. And then do that to both sides so that you have a big X. These creases will become a guide to sew straight lines, but we'll get more into that later. So next, lay out your batting and place your outer fabric directly on top of it. I do like to make sure that my batting is a little bit bigger than my fabric. This one's a little overkill, but I was just working with what I had. Yours doesn't have to be this big, but do make it a little bit bigger than your outer fabric. And then you can pin it into place. I only do 2 pins because there is some shifting during the quilting process, but I keep these 2 pins until I've got at least my first line sewn, and then I might take it out. And then we'll start sewing a line over that crease we made earlier. If you have your own method for quilting straight lines, by all means do what you do normally. This is just for the people who haven't found that method yet. So now that we have that first sewn line, I will then take my guide bar and place it into my machine. I have attached the link of this one in my instructions. Remember that these are specific to your machine. So make sure the arm of that guide bar stays over that line that you previously sewed. At this point, I'm not even looking where I'm sewing. I'm only making sure the guide bar stays over that line. You're going to continue that process until you've completed it. Here's what mine's looking like after I'm done. Then start trimming off that excess batting. I know I have a lot here. I will end up reusing this in another project as like stuffing. All right, we're finally getting to constructing the pattern. Hold your fabric on itself, right sides together, and just make sure everything is lining up correctly on top of each other. So basically you shouldn't see any of your outer fabric popping through. Everything should be neatly lined up together. Then you can start pinning the outer edges on the sides together. I also like to throw on some clips at the top, and that's just for stabilization. As you sew, you'll remove pins, but the clips can stay in because you're not sewing at the top. And the purpose here is just to show you where you'll be sewing. You're going to sew lines down the side with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And because we're going to do the same exact thing with our inner lining, we might as well do it now. Set it up to look exactly like your outer fabric, fold it on itself, right sides together. Make sure there's no overlap anywhere, and then pin it into place. And you can add some clips to the top if you'd like. And here's another visualization of where you're going to be sewing down the side. We are going to leave a gap on one side. I do this by sewing from the start until about 1.5 inches down, and then leaving about 1.5 inches and sewing from that point down again, making sure to back stitch each time. All right, now we've talked about it, let's do it. So start sewing your lines down the edges and making sure that we're doing this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I would consider this pattern extremely beginner friendly, but there's not a lot of room for error, so you do have to make sure you follow those seam allowance recommendations so that it fits your Weck jar. So after you've done the outer fabric, move on to your inner fabric. I chose this side to sew a line from start to finish, and then the opposite side, like I'm showing you now, we will leave our gap.
You definitely want to leave at least 1.5 inches
from when you start sewing to the gap. That area is too short, it'll be really difficult to sew it up later. All right, and now it's time to box out our corners. So turn your fabric onto its side and use your pointer finger and your thumb to pull the fabric apart and make it into a horizontal line. I also like to make sure that my seam is laying flat. I'll use 1 clip in the seam and then 2 pins on the sides. While we're here, we can box out the other corner, and we're doing the same thing that we just did. Lay the fabric flat and then clip and pin it into place. And I'm pointing out where we're going to be sewing right along the edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're also going to box out the corners of our inner lining in the exact same way that we just did with the outer fabric. And make sure you're doing that to both sides, just like we did with the outer fabric. And now we're just going to begin sewing. Again, 1/4 inch seam allowance down the edges. Reminder that every time you sew, you will backstitch before you start and when you end. Sorry if this feels so monotonous, but here we go again. We're going to do the same exact thing to our inner fabric. You're going to be a pro at boxing out corners by the time we're done with this. And here's your close-up of doing the same thing that we just did, our 4th time, but we are done. And I'm excited to tell you we're getting close to the finish line. So we'll start out by flipping our outer fabric so that it's right side out, but make sure that your inner fabric remains inside out. So you should be able to visualize all of your seams and threads and all the good stuff. Now take your outer fabric and place it inside of your inside out inner fabric. Shimmy it on in there and then make sure that your seams are lined up for both your outer fabric and your inner fabric. This is just going to make your final product look professional. So once you line all of your edges up well, then you'll pin/clip everything into place. But as you're going around, make sure you're lining up that edge of the inner fabric with the outer fabric. You'll notice I'm using clips here. Once my fabrics start to get thicker, I like clips. And then now we're going to sew all the way around the edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on top of the batting, so that your inner fabric is facing down. If you do it like this, I feel like this fabric can trickily get underneath and you can end up sewing it together and it can be a mess. So do whatever you would like, but I prefer to do it like this. I think I'm able to hold this fabric back and sew exactly where I want to sew. And then just begin sewing all the way around with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and reminder to backstitch at the start and the end. Now is when that gap that we left in the inner fabric comes in handy. So go ahead and pull your outer fabric from that hole in your inner lining. And I always recommend inspecting the outer fabric before you close that hole. But if everything looks good, then line up the edges of the gap and pin it into place and go ahead and sew it. This time I actually don't do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I try to get as close as possible to the edge. When that's done, you can go ahead and stuff all of the inner lining into the koozie. You want to align the top of the outer fabric and inner fabric so that they're proportional and laying evenly on top of each other. You can use clips to secure this all into place. We'll now sew our top stitch along the edges again. When you start sewing, do it right here at the seam because I feel like the back stitch is a little less noticeable. And this is really the last step. I always last minute decide that I want to add a bow. So you can go ahead and stitch one on real quick, or you could do it at the beginning so that you don't see the sewn lines. And then go ahead and slide your Weck jar right on in. And you've done it. Congratulations on finishing this project. As always, you can reach out to me if you need any help with anything, but I hope you guys had fun learning how to sew this.